Welcome back to the second part of my conversation with Jim McNeal. In the first part of the conversation, or at least 2 weeks ago, we talked about his journey, his work with the Naval Academy, high school coaching, college coaching, and his passion for mentorship and helping kids navigate through failure. I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode if you didn't before jumping into this one. But I just hope you enjoy part two. My friend told me about the leadership class you teach.
Yes.
Tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about that course specifically.
Okay. So real quick, so the leadership curriculum, it's a leadership laboratory, it's a leadership school. So there's a leadership course every year. Your freshman year, it's basically learning about yourself.
Mhm.
That's because you can't lead others unless you know yourself. Your junior year is more leading others. Your senior year is about the law, some of the law and the junior officer stuff. But the sophomore year, the class that I teach is called Ethical and Moral Reasoning for the Naval Leader. And it's an interesting kind of hybrid course. On Mondays, which we just had today, it was we have a real what I call a real teacher, like my wife, a PhD, an academic who goes over the academic curriculum, and then Wednesday and Friday, I say, okay, we talked about this, but this is how it's relevant to you as a junior officer.
'Kay.
So it's generally referred to as ethics. Who do you have for ethics? But I tell them the first day, look, this is a leadership class, and I'm not an academic. I'm a, and that's what adjuncts typically are, know their field, and that's what I am. And so we're going to talk at this stuff. If you have a really in-depth academic question, Dr. Skirker, our philosopher, he can explain all that stuff to you. But I'm going to tell you why it's important to you as a junior officer. And that's how we're gonna go through it. But that's talking about mentoring, making you better. Uh, this teaching this class, we didn't have that when I was here,
Mhm.
and it was mandated by Congress in the mid '90s after a big cheating scandal. And but it's made me so much better as a person by teaching this class and really understanding myself and hey, when I do this, I'm just rationalizing this, and I mean, it's made me better, and it's been a real blessing to me to be able to help these kids, and the reason we do it sophomore year, and there's a thing called 2 for 7. So when they show up for their junior year, they have to sign a contract that says so they've already done 2 years and they're gonna do another 7, so 2 at the academy and 5 in the Navy or Marine Corps, and basically they get in their white uniform and they sign a contract, and it says, "If you leave, then you owe us money back for your education. If you leave at the end of your sophomore year, you walk away without any obligation." And so it's a big deal to them. And the reason we want to do this class this semester is we talk about things like, hey, you're on a ship and you're in charge of sending Tomahawk missile. You're the Tomahawk fire control officer. So you're in charge of sending Tomahawk missiles and you're sending to a military target. And then you find out a half an hour before you're going to launch that there's a school right next to it and the school's in session. And there's going to be collateral damage if you blow up this weapons factory with the school next to it. And you got to push the button. Can you do that? And we talk about the ethics, that talk about the morals, that we talk through all that stuff. And we have some kids who just say, I don't know if I can do that. And they say, then you can't be here.
Mhm.
It's because that's not, you have to do what's right for you, but you can't be here if that's, and so you need to really think about, hey, do you want to stay? And we have a few handful of kids that will leave because it's actually way easier to stay than leave.
Mhm.
I have a lot of respect for the kids who leave when they realize it's not for them, because no matter what, when they go back home, everybody's like, "Oh, academy wasn't for you, huh? Yeah, uh-huh.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't for you," right? Even though that might be the decision they're making, it's way easier just to stay and just not have to deal with that stuff at home?
Yeah. So one thing been fascinated about in my career, I spent 4 years as a dean of students or VP of student life and spent a lot of time studying student developmental theory of college age kids. And that sophomore to junior year is interesting because it goes from a lot of relational type stuff to bigger picture stuff. Could
Mhm.
kids really dive into those conversations and the deeper nuance of it all? I'm curious, just that seems like it'd be a challenging thing teaching wise to get them to dive deep.
Yeah, it is, and the other thing is it still is a class, and so you're not gonna have 100% of the people dive in. My wife's, you know, when she said when she was here, the leadership classes she took, she said, "I wish I could have spent more time doing those classes, but I had other fish to fry." And so the example I'd like to use is, hey, I can get a B in ethics and get a D in physics, which is preferable to an A in ethics and an F in physics.
Mhm.
And so, I think one of the things that the Naval Academy teaches all these midshipmen, certainly me, is time management. What's the alligator closest to the boat? What has to be done today? How are you going to prioritize your time? Because we all only have 24 hours.
Mhm.
And so how are we going to use this time? And you have some kids who just will dive in and they'll say, this is the greatest class I've had, and still have a great relationship with them. Other kids, I just know they're just like, "Look, I'm an engineer. I'm trying to be a robotics and controls engineer, so yeah, this stuff's good. I can probably do the minimum and get a B. If I learn a couple things, that's great, but I got other stuff to do." And I'm not gonna try and change their mind or whatever, that's not really my job. So, hey, here's me, here's what I'm about, and I'm gonna try to do the very best I can for you, and if you wanna embrace it, great, and if you don't, that's your call because it's your life.
Yeah. The alligator closest to the boat. I've never heard that.
You ever heard that?
Never heard that.
Oh, yeah. And I when I it's funny because when I really get and, I'm really semi-retired, so I only do what I wanna do, but sometimes I just overextend myself, and it really becomes very, very cutthroat of, "Okay, I have an hour. What absolutely has to happen
Mhm.
between now and, 2 o'clock?"
Mhm.
And I'll look at it, and I'll just say, "Okay, this and this and this," and it's just kinda crystallizes that, and that's the skill you learn here because part of the failing thing is, hey, we're gonna put you in situations where you don't have enough time. It's a physics issue. I remember we would go to when plebe summer, we would go out and we do a workout in the morning, and back then the door in Bancroft Hall wasn't air conditioned. So you would take a shower, then you'd be drenched, 5 seconds later because it was just hot in there. But they would say, "Okay," they would dismiss us. I had 2 roommates. "All right, guys all have to go up, take a shower, get your get out of your PT gear, get your uniform on. I need you back here in 8 minutes." Okay, that's impossible. That's not gonna happen. And they knew that, but that was part of the whole thing. "Hey, how are you gonna react to that stress?"
Mhm.
"Hey, I did my best. I did everything I could." So, for me, one of the great lessons I learned from the academy was time management.
Mhm.
And any successful I've never seen a successful person who wasn't a good time manager.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't think I've ever looked at it in that way. That makes some sense. Well, let's transition. Um,
Okay.
I'm not big enough time where this is a paid advertisement, but I loved your book. Actually, one of our he recommended some of our coaches, and one's already reading through it too.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic.
but yeah, I got some questions, but kinda give the overview of the book, and I think it just came out this past summer. But yeah.
Yeah, it came out June 10th.
Okay.
It's, the 3rd book I've done with a collaborator. The first one was the Herndon Climb, which is about the, experience at the end of the plebe year of climbing an obelisk, like a little Washington monument, that signifies the end of the plebe year. I did that with a friend of mine we met in 7th grade. And then the last 2 books, including Crucibles, were with the Naval Academy grad, also Supply Corps officer, Eric Smith. And kind of the genesis of this, I was doing an authors panel for uh, the Herndon Climb, and they said, "Hey, you can pick your moderator." And so I picked a friend of mine, and he said, "Okay, here's the questions I'm going to ask you." And so we went through this panel, and I was just nailing stuff, right? I already had, I had to answer the test and everybody's, I'm just brilliant, all this different stuff. And then he says, "Okay, so what's your next book?" And I'm like, I didn't answer for that one. And so I just kind of blurted out, "Well, I just think maybe a history of plebe year at the academy, that might be fun." And so that was it. And then I kind of just tucked that away. And then we were looking for our next project. I thought, we could frame it around our plebe summer and plebe year, but let's look at some organizations that do have different types of crucibles, because the Naval Academy was absolutely a crucible. I was just on a podcast recently with Grant Vermeer called Academy Insider. We talked about this. Is the academy still a crucible, even though it's changed? The kids have changed and it's kind of changed its methods. And absolutely, yes. So we just started, hey, let's look at different types of organizations that have crucibles events, and let's just compare and contrast, and just see, are there some commonalities or things we can learn about it, and what we enjoy about the books. And we would love to, be a New York Times bestseller and sell millions of copies and all that stuff, but we enjoy our relationship, the time we get to spend together doing it, and we learn a lot from doing all of this research. So with all the different organizations we did, I do, so the way we kind of divided up, kind of a director producer relationship. So uh, Eric does most of the writing and I do everything else. And so a lot of the, I do all the interviews, and, um, but we work on everything, crafting everything together. And I'm glad to hear you liked it, because we think there's some really interesting stories of some interesting groups, and what you can learn from those
Yeah.
groups.
So define crucible for everybody. Just make sure we're all on the same page.
So crucible is something that a group or organization puts their potential members through to to make them worthy of that group. So you could say, with, say, a football team, it's back, they don't do 2 days anymore, but back in the old days, 2-a-days, right? Summer camp, um, getting through that. So this it's kind of a barrier to entry,
Mhm.
right? So why is it a big deal? I interviewed Major General Bolden for the chapter on astronauts. Well, if you and I were astronauts and so was everybody else, then it wouldn't be a big deal to be an astronaut. But what is the crucible for that? And it was just, and it was a fascinating interview with General Bolden, because again, and I stuff that I learned, you had the Mercury 7, right, which were the initial group of astronauts, and he said it's really changed on the types of people they're looking for, because, and it makes total sense. I had never thought of this. They didn't know what space was going to do to people.
Mhm.
So they said, "Hey, look, we need the most physically perfect specimens of people that we can find, because we have no idea what's gonna happen when human beings get into space." Well, now they figured out, well, it's actually, there's some stuff, weightlessness, but we can send women up there. We can send scientists up there. We can send really smart people who may not be the best physical specimen of all time, but because we know what space does to people. So they kinda changed their crucible a little bit. But the whole point of it was, hey, if we're gonna go do this thing and send somebody into space in a space capsule, we're gonna put them through this crucible. And I think even like Apollo, you saw what happened, everybody's familiar with Apollo 13. You know, those 3 guys, and Admiral or Captain, Jim Lovell, just passed away a week or
Saw
2
that.
ago.
Yep.
Uh, but those 3 guys survived because of the crucible that they had been put through by NASA.
Mhm.
Me, you, and, our best friend would not have survived up there doing the stuff that they did. And you look at it, and that's why we didn't want it just be military. We wanted to be That's why we tried to make it as kinda diverse and as, different groups as possible.
Well, it was fascinating because you start out the first part of your story, the Naval Academy. Then you go all these crucibles from NASA to I found can't remember what they're called, the Hawaiian group where they threw them in the water with with the sharks to, the Mafia. I mean, everything in
Yeah.
between, and some of it is crucibles can be used I mean, they can be in any type of organization. Um, that I just yeah, reading about the Mafia and the Made Men, that's stuff I didn't know. It was fascinating to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we, and again, we tried to pull, different lessons out
Mhm.
from each of these crucibles. For the Mafia one, it was while we don't endorse organized crime and killing people and all that other stuff. There's this disclaimer there. It's about
It was
it's about
I would
loyalty,
say it
right?
was one of the more
It's about
powerful
loyalty.
examples that kinda cemented the concept for me.
Okay,
Yeah,
good, good,
and, and they're doing a bunch of terrible things, but it was just an
right.
interesting read. Um, 2 things that
And
came.
the Gurk I'm sorry, I was gonna say the Gurkhas for me um, was a really interesting chapter just because I had always heard the Gurkhas. I had seen the Gurkhas in the Middle East when I was deployed there, but I didn't realize, Nepal and how, someone becomes a Gurkha, I mean, that sets their
Yeah,
family up,
forever, yeah.
for life. And think of I mean, you think about, I mean, we take a lot for granted here in the US. Yeah, we have poor people. Yes, we have poverty, but if you've ever traveled internationally, you don't know poverty till you've been in some of these countries that I've been to.
Yeah.
The poorest person here would be a king in some countries.
Mhm.
And when basically in Nepal, every single able-bodied young man tries out for this thing because it's the ticket for I mean,
Yeah,
that's a lot of pressure.
yeah. Um, I wanna talk about 2 things. One, looking through the lens of coaching and just our current state, it was really easy to see on teams how crucibles can turn into hazing or turn into the bad side of things. Um, I don't even know how to frame the question. I'm just curious your thoughts on that and how to manage them in a healthy way to where they're an add-on to the organization that builds pride and, yeah, give me your response to that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely, and I love traditions.
Yeah.
I absolutely love traditions, and I hate when traditions get, you know, compromised or removed or whatever, but I think there's that line where, "Hey, are we doing this to bring this person in? Or are we doing this to push this person out?"
Mhm.
And when it becomes like some of these bands have these kind of crazy hazing rituals and things like that. And I may get skewered for this. I think there's positive hazing and there's negative hazing. Everybody says hazing, is the H word. We don't use that word. If you're putting somebody through something and you can tie it to a positive result, that's not hazing
Mhm.
in my view. If you can't tie it to a positive result for the organization, then it is hazing. That's the dividing line I make.
Mhm.
So, for example, one of the things and I think we talked about in the book, one of the things the plebes have to do, what Doc Beeman's daughter's doing, she did it about an hour and a half ago, is she have to do a chow call where you have to memorize a bunch of information. You have to stand out in front of the outside an upper classes room, and you have to memorize this information, scream it at the top of your lungs, and do it very fast, and then repeat it 5 minutes later. And now some people would probably watch that and see that and say, "Well, that's just," and then if they stumble, then it's kinda like sharks with blood in the water. Here come the upper class and, "Hey, don't you know this stuff?" And there might be some yelling, all that stuff. And you're like, "Wow, look at that hazing going on." And that to an outsider, I could see where people would say that. However, what about is there anything about it memorize information that you have to remember to be able to repeat back? Is there anything we could tie that to the Navy and Marine Corps? Well, yes, there is. When you're in an airplane, when you're flying a Marine or Marine or Navy aircraft, and you have the manuals up there with you, you have a bunch of information. However, if you're in an F-18 and an engine goes out, you don't have time to Google that. You don't have time to look it up in the manual. There's a certain number of steps that you have to memorize, repeat out loud, and do in the exact order, or you're going to probably die. That's stressful. So if you're at the Naval Academy and you can't do a chow call without someone in your face because you can't remember the menu for noon meal, How are you going to do that as an F-18 pilot? So that's not hazing. Now, if you're doing something to degrade someone or demean somebody, and you say, how is this make you better? And you can't answer that question, then that's hazing and you shouldn't
Yeah.
do that. But I don't think putting people under stress is hazing.
Yeah. Well, I thought you guys, this is kind of my last comment slash question, brought it together masterfully at the end when you're talking about the concept of learning organizations and how like a crucible needs to be designed. I'm looking at it right now. You guys are right. It should be designed and managed to meet each of the 5 elements of a learning organization: testing personal mastery, challenging assumptions, building culture, expanding expertise, and representing a purposeful strategic process. And I think you just covered all 5 of those in your example right there.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, and this is, I covered this a little bit on another podcast I did. We've got to be really careful at the Naval Academy of not wanting to be unique, because it costs a lot of, I mean, when these kids sign this 2 for 7, I don't know where they get this number from because they're not on scholarship. It's a made up number in my opinion, but it's 240,000 or something. So if you were to leave the day before graduation because you didn't want to stay, you'd have to pay 240,000. So that's a lot of money, that
Mhm.
times 4,400, so whatever that is. Um, but we have to be really careful that the taxpayers are getting the bang for their buck. And if that, you can go ROTC at UCLA for a quarter of that. So we have to be 3 or 4 times better. The officers that we produce at the Naval Academy have to be 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever times better than what OCS, Officer Candidate School or OTC can produce, or there is no reason for having the
Hmm.
Naval Academy. So I think as we try to be a little kinder, gentler, we've got to be really mindful of the fact of, hey, but are we still producing because only 20% of the officers are from the Naval Academy. It's only 20%,
I know
the
that.
entire officer. So we need to make sure that those 20% are as best as they can possibly be, so they're worth that money. If not, then just send everybody to OCS and ROTC and, we don't need the school.
Yeah. Well, I highly recommend the book, and for you non-readers out there, I'd say you buy it, read the first and last chapter, then the summary at the end, and there was so much that I think any coach or athletic leader could take away from. So, really good stuff. Any final thoughts?
Yep. It's also an audiobook.
Oh, there you go. Are you reading it on the audiobook? Are you there?
No, 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 our publisher hired a pro to do it, so we thought that was better, but, um, no, I mean, I think that, coaching is such a great thing to do. I know that when people find out I'm a football coach and I've spent my time doing this, I think they definitely look at me like I'm a little bit weird that I would be spending my time doing this, but the joy and the impact that you have on these kids. So I just want to say thank you to all those coaches out there, whatever sport it is, because and there's some sort of you know thing out there that says that a kid will spend more time with their coach often than any other adult.
Yep.
And we make coaches make such a huge impact. And the other thing is, and this happens all the time, you'll say something and someone will say, you said to me 6 years ago, you said blah, blah, blah. And I really took that to heart. And that kind of, was a good course correction for me. And my answer to that is always A, I don't remember that. But B, it does sound like something I'd say.
Sometimes those comments scare me too, some things they might remember. Well, I almost let you off the hook there, but I'm not going to. We always wrap up with, kind of what we call lightning round, where I'm gonna ask you 4 or
Okay.
5 questions. You have no longer than 30 seconds to answer any of them.
Ooh,
We'll finish here.
okay. Okay.
Question 1, what is one book that has greatly influenced your life?
Season of Life by Jeffrey Marks. Highly recommended for any coach. Basically, um, a year in the life of a high school team in Baltimore, and it's all about exactly what we've talked about of hey, it isn't about the season, is what type of husbands, fathers, mothers are we doing with these
Yeah.
kids? How are we building them up for success in life?
Well, you just named one of my favorite books. So well done.
Oh, okay.
Number two, how has a failure or a parent failure set you up for later success? Or said differently, do you have a favorite failure?
Well, like I said, I think I talked about it where, my mentee said, "Hey, that was a great season," and I said, "Really, it wasn't." And it helped me that next season of coaching because I kept talking, a lot of defensive coaches, "Hey, under 60 yards rushing, no more than this, no more than this," and I'd say, "Look, what's our standard? Don't worry about all the other stuff. What is our standard? So don't worry. So we're going to go to our standard." So that was kind of a real game changer for me from a coaching perspective of what is our standard. That's what we're shooting for, not a bunch of external judging.
Right on. How do you define success in your work?
Well, if it's work, it's probably not success. At this stage of my life, if I consider it work, it's probably not, I'm not probably doing it right. Um, and if I'm not, this stage of my life, if I'm not enjoying myself, then I'm probably doing it wrong.
Well said. Last one. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
Um, Probably getting up early, and I won't and I would say get up early. My daughter-in-law calls it getting up in the middle of the night, but often I'll get up between 3 or 4 AM, and it allows me to operate without any external influences. I can do whatever I want at 3 in the morning. No one is gonna bug me at all, and now my kids, when I grade things or I'm putting out film, grading on film, and they always just get amazed when they see what time it goes out, but, that's one thing that you can control, and, when people say, "Oh, I couldn't get up that early." Well, what time do you go to bed? "Oh, I go to bed at midnight." "Well, what are you doing from 9 to 12?" "Oh, I'm doing this and what," so people can kinda do what they want, but it's been a game changer for me to get up earlier than I used to get up because that just gives me just kind of a solid foundation for the day.
I like it. Well, that was great. We went ranged enough across different categories. We might split this into 2 episodes for everybody, but, really good stuff. So thanks for joining me. Any final thoughts?
No, I was really happy that Doc, made this introduction, and, I appreciate what you're doing with this because I know that this takes up your time as well, and I think, what podcasts and people trying to get information out to other people just makes us all better, and it just kinda shows to me that we're all in this thing, it's a collective fight. And there's a lot of forces out there that are trying to tear us down. And it's this type of stuff that kind of builds us back up. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this. And I appreciate appreciate you doing this and providing me this opportunity. So thanks for having me.
No, happy to do it and really enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond Coaching. Beyond Coaching is a podcast developed and produced by the Impactful Coaching Project with the support of Friends University. The Impactful Coaching Project seeks to develop coaches that coach the whole person and is the thought leader in coaching the 21st century athlete. The Impactful Coaching Project produces training, information, and research to help coaches improve. To see more information, go to impactfulcoachingproject.substack.com. Thank you.